the Shir, Dach Yomi, Torah Or, Yadalit and Aleph, in the middle of the Maimer Pasach Aliyahu, explaining the Maimer from the Zohar, which is explaining what the idea of Atzilus is. That is, Hashem Himself is infinite, and He decided that the way that He is going to relate to us is through the world called Atzilus, through Seder Shtalshlus, through the order of spiritual worlds, but mainly through the world called Atzilus. So we're trying to explain a little bit of how Atzilus works, in order to understand how Hashem relates to us. And so we explained yesterday that in the person's soul, there's three aspects. There's the essence of the person, which does not change, which is the same from the time that he's born until his entire life. And there's the person's intellect and emotions, which is not the essence of the person, but it's still a part of his person. It's the makeup of his personality, even though it's not the essence of his personality. And then there's the way that he expresses himself through thought, speech, and deed, which is an external expression of the person, which is not completely unified with the essence. In other words, you could separate between your actions and who you are. Whereas your intellect and emotion, you can't separate it from who you are. That's a part of who you are. It's a part of your personality. So Hashem made that there should be a world called Atzilus, and there should be a world called Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. The world of Atzilus, Hashem becomes unified with that world. Hashem decided that that world should be how He's going to show Himself to us, and so the wisdom and the understanding and the kindness and the severity in that world is Hashem's wisdom and Hashem's understanding and Hashem's kindness and severity. So it becomes one with Hashem. Whereas the way that He expresses Himself in the created worlds, the spheres in Bria, Yetzira, Asiya, are like Hashem's thought, speech, and actions, as if it were, which through that He runs the world and He creates the world, but it's not unified with Hashem as much as the world of Atzilus. And so with that we're explaining why it's called Tikkunim. So we left off trying to explain how we're trying to explain, it says in the Zohar, Antu Chakim v'la v'chachmi yediyah, that you are one, but not with a knowable wisdom. Antu Chakim v'la v'chachmi yediyah, you are wise, but not with a knowable wisdom. So there's two things. There's that Antu Chakim, that you are wise, and v'la v'chachmi yediyah, that wisdom is not something that we can know. It's a type of an understanding, it's a type of wisdom, but not type of understanding that we can relate to directly. So we're trying to understand, what does it mean that Hashem has this wisdom that we can't know? If it's wisdom, how come we can't know it? So the answer is that it's such a higher type of wisdom that even though for Hashem it makes sense, but for us we can't directly understand it. Only through a series of progressions can there come from Hashem's wisdom, a wisdom that we can directly relate to. And so we're going to explain through a few examples, through a few mashalim, to explain how from Hashem's wisdom, the way that it's in Atzilus, there comes our wisdom, the way that we understand things. Hini ha'inyan. So we're on the Sefer Torah, or the bottom of Yud Gimel Amud, or whatever, the bottom of the second half of Yud Gimel, the 4 lines from the bottom on the left in the original Torah. So we'll understand the progression of Hashem's wisdom coming into us, to our type of wisdom, from the way that we find that when you have plants that are growing from the ground, so in the plants there could be fruits that are sweet and fruits that are sour. And we know that plants get their life from the koach hatzameach, from the vegetative power which is in the ground. And it says that that this spiritual power to grow comes also from the mazalos, comes from Hashem, but it comes through a whole series. It comes through the mazalos, comes through the sun and the moon, and from the angels. This is where Hashem's life comes through all these levels until it comes into the fruit that you eat. So in the fruit that you eat, you'll find that there's sour and there's sweet. But that sour and sweetness has a spiritual source. What does that mean? He's saying any grass has an angel which makes it grow. In other words, you're seeing only grass, which is physical, but the power for that grass to grow is a spiritual power to grow. And that spiritual power that makes the grass grow has a spiritual source. It says that every angel, the way the angels work is that they're a progression of different levels, which that's what we call Seder Hishtalshalos. The spiritual worlds are different levels that Hashem made, how He's going to reveal Himself to us. And so the life that Hashem gives is through all these levels. So the apple that you eat, it has sweetness. So are you going to say that the spiritual power of vegetation, which is in the ground, also has a sweetness? So you can't say that. So even though the apple has sweetness, and we know that the apple grows from the ground, so where does the sweetness grow? The sweetness also comes from the ground. So how come if you eat dirt it doesn't taste sweet? Right? It's a good question. If the apple is sweet and the apple grows from the ground should also be sweet. What's the answer? The way that sweetness exists in the spiritual vegetation power in the ground is a different kind of sweetness. Not the kind of sweetness that you have when you eat the apple, even though it's the source of the sweetness which is in the apple. So what's the idea of sweetness is the idea of kindness. What's the idea of being a sour fruit like a lemon? That's the idea of severity. And so this spiritual aspect of kindness and severity, that exists in the koyach hatzameich, in the vegetative power in the ground. And in all these spiritual levels where the life comes from, has this idea of kindness and severity. Even though it's a very distant kind, there's a big distance between the kindness, the way that it's in the spiritual level, and the way that's expressed in physical sweetness in the apple. But since it's the same type of idea, so it's able to come from that to this. That's called Seder Shtalshalos. Like we see in a person, that the idea of sweetness and enjoyment can be expressed in completely different levels. There's the enjoyment you have from eating food, and the enjoyment you have from singing a song or listening to a song, and the enjoyment you have from learning a topic, learning deep wisdom. So all of these is very enjoyable, but the enjoyment that you have is on completely different levels. So you can have the same idea, this idea of sweetness and enjoyment, expressed on completely different levels. So the same thing we're going to say, that Hashem's wisdom, the way that's in Atzilus, can come down through all the levels until it reaches us. So that's what it means, Chakim v'la v'chachmidia. It's a wisdom, but we can't directly understand it. Only through all these series of levels can it come to our type of understanding. וגם שחכמה דיבריה אינם ערך ולמהוס חכמה הנירס וניגליס בעשייה מקווקם הוא מקור בשורש ליוס ממנה היסחבס בכנס חכמה דסי הניגליס חולהו וכך היא חכמה דצילס אם יוספהו בכנס חכים ולא וחכמה ידיע מקווקם היא בכנס מקור דמקור חולהו. So the wisdom that Hashem has, Hashem's understanding, the way that's in Atzilus, even though that's very far removed from our type of understanding, like it says, that the way that Hashem thinks is not like the way that we think, but it's a source for our type of understanding. The way that Hashem created His type of understanding in Atzilus, it's enough limited and definable that from it can come our type of understanding, even though it has to come through all these levels, but it's the source of our type of understanding. That's what it means. Chakim v'la v'chachmidia. It's a wisdom, but you can't know it directly. Only through many stages can it come into directly understandable wisdom. Avaliyas antu chakim. The hainam shachas ornsef b'chachma. Hine chachma mamish meinti matzei. L'chein hi b'chinas anvas denusa yisbarach. Shu yirida gedol lefanav yisbarach. V'zel lashon atzilas b'lashon hakodesh. Shu lashon yirida v'ashpalam madrigas al yona. L'hash b'las atzmei ki hilu hu b'madriga. V'chus k'moi v'atzalti minerach tagabi Moshe. V'lefi shemar ma'ayin li basar. Shaisa madrigas v'mayla al yona. V'loi ha'yachol l'hash b'las atzmei b'am shachas basar gashmi. V'kach amar l'kodesh baruch hu esveli shivim ish. Shehem b'madriga b'chusa. Hainu shelo yu misgashmi mamish. Elavatsalti minerach asher alecha v'samti alehem. Pirish she'oirid v'amshech b'china shalcha shiyeh lamata medregascha. V'samti alehem sheyanika gam lahem medregazoi. Avaloi shiyu oilim ma'amalas medregas meishatz mechol. So we explained before what's the idea of yediyah antu chakim v'lo v'chachma yediyah. We explained what does it mean v'lo v'chachma yediyah. Now we want to explain what does it mean antu chakim. The you are wise. What does it mean you are wise? Who are you and what's it mean wise? Like we explained before, that Jewish people, they like to speak. Sometimes it sounds a little funny. Who are you and what is wise? That's the question. You, when we say ant, you, we mean Hashem, the way that he's higher than Atzilus, the way that Hashem is to himself. And Hashem himself, that he's the creator of the world of Atzilus and all the worlds. He decided that he's going to reveal himself in Chachma Atzilus, in this wisdom that becomes his wisdom. But this wisdom that Hashem created, Hashem has to take from his real infinite truth, the real infinite truth of Hashem, and limit it to make a type of a wisdom which could be a source for our wisdom. Right? If Hashem is infinite, then there's no, even if there would be a million levels between Hashem's wisdom and our wisdom, if Hashem's wisdom would be infinite, then they would never come to us, because we're finite, and between finite and infinite there's no connection. So Hashem had to make a finite type of wisdom, and even though that finite wisdom is a lot greater than ours, but it still has a definition, Chachma v'Atzilus, even though it's much higher than us, but it's still a source for our wisdom. Whereas Hashem himself, that he's infinite, and the revelation of himself is also infinite, so there can't be a wisdom that we can relate to from that. So that's what I mean, Antu Chakim, that you, Hashem, that he's much higher than any wisdom that could be definable and limited. He created and brings himself down into a wisdom which has Chachma v'Atzilus. And that's what it means. The word Atzilus means to draw down to a lower level that someone else should be able to relate to. Where do we find this? We find this by Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu told the Yidden asked Moshe Rabbeinu that they wanted to have meat. So Moshe Rabbeinu said, "Mi'ayin li basar, where do I have meat?" So it doesn't just mean that he said that he didn't know physically where to have meat. In fact, the Yidden themselves already had meat. They already had cows. What does it mean, Mi'ayin li basar? Where am I going to get meat? It means that I have no connection to meat. You're asking me for something physical like meat? Moshe Rabbeinu says, what connection do I have to meat? Do I look like somebody who eats meat? Am I some kind of guy who goes to restaurants and likes to eat meat? Why are you asking me for meat? So what was Hashem's answer? Hashem said, you should bring for 70 elders, that even though they'll be holy, but they're not going to be holy like Moshe Rabbeinu. So they'll know what meat is. And so with Moshe Rabbeinu, the spirit of Hashem, which is in Moshe Rabbeinu, will be drawn down to the level of these 70 elders, that they could give the people meat. That through them, Moshe Rabbeinu could bring down that there should be meat for the people on which that's their level, that they're holding by, they do eat meat. So there had to be an intermediary between Moshe Rabbeinu and the people, that from Moshe Rabbeinu that he has no connection to eating meat, and the people that they like to eat meat. So there's these holy people that on the one hand they relate to Moshe Rabbeinu, but also they know what meat is. So that's the idea, that from the spirit which is on Moshe is drawn down to a lower level of these 70 elders, that from them can be a connection to the rest of the people on their level. So that's the world of Atzilus. Atzilus means that from Hashem's infinite truth, which has no connection to any finite existence, Hashem made this world called Atzilus, where he brings down and limits himself, that we can have a connection to us. So that's what Atzilus means. Inyan Atzilus hu b'chinas rida liusis labshus Ein Sof b'chachmachul v'chein ikar first Atzilus as a dikonin shehem b'chanas levushin Ein Sof v'le atzim yischulu m'kumakom inan levushin mamash al tikonin mishum diu v'gamay chan chulu mashen can be akanal. So that's the idea of Atzilus, that Hashem's infinite light, the infinite truth of Hashem, should be expressed in His wisdom and His other attributes in Atzilus, that through them it's able to relate to us. But in the world of Atzilus, even though it's not the essence of Hashem, it's only Hashem's revelation, but it's united with Him. Like we said, a person's intellect and emotions, even though it's not the essence of his personality, but it's a part of his personality. It's not something separate from Him. So too, the world of Atzilus, it's not something separate from Hashem. It's Hashem's wisdom and Hashem's kindness and severity, even though it's limited and finite. But it becomes Hashem's wisdom and kindness and severity. Whereas in the created worlds of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiyah, so those attributes are like the Hashem's thought, speech, and deed, which are not as united with Hashem so much. So that's what the idea of Atzilus is. Now we're going to explain what does it mean Antu Chad V'lo V'chushpan, which is part of this mimer that Eliyahu Navi said to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and in explaining how Atzilus works. V'zeu Antu Chad V'lo V'chushpan she'ein nimda b'chol yitzfiris v'koy al kesel in mutzah ben amatzil and etzalim she'ein rechel of klal kishavus chachma mehakeser hi me'ayin mamish v'lo yikasir shtalsha she'ein b'chinas is havus yesh meish chulu. So it says that you are one, but not numerically, not in calculation. What does that mean? It means there's two types of counting one. There's one, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That one is part of a series of numbers. And then there's one, meaning that he's unique, that he's special and removed from everything else. That it's not part of a series, it's something completely separate. That's what it means, Antu Echad V'lo V'chushpan. You're one, but not numerically, not part of a series of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, meaning it's not part of that grouping, but rather it's one and unique, that it's separate and special and removed. So what does that mean? That means Hashem Himself is completely separate and removed from any limitation that you could have in the world of Atzilus. But He decided that He would reveal Himself through the world of Atzilus. So He's one, and He's not part of the 10 spheres. What are we saying He's not part of the 10 spheres? Obviously Hashem is not as part of 10 spheres. Hashem made the spheres. We're speaking about a level, it's called Keser. Keser means a crown. What's the idea of a crown? A crown goes above your head. So what does that mean? That means that it's something which is higher than the person himself. It goes above the person. So in a person's intellect and emotions, in a person's personality makeup, there's intellect and there's emotions, and then there's Keser, which is higher, which means that the essence of the person is much higher than his intellect and his emotions, and there has to be some way that from his essence he's able to relate to and be revealed in his intellect and his emotions. That's the idea of Keser. Keser means to bring down and connect from the essence into the intellect and the emotions, and in this case to bring down and connect from the essence of Hashem into the world of Atzilus. That's the idea of Keser. And that's that level called Keser. Even though it's a level, it's not the essence of Hashem, but it's much higher than the 10 spheres. That's what it means, that it's one, but not in calculation, meaning it's separate and removed and unique, because this level called Keser is removed from the 10 spheres, but it's the source of how Hashem reveals Himself in the 10 spheres. V'zeu Antu Chad V'lo V'chushpan she'ein nimda b'chol yitzfiris v'koy al kesel in mutzah ben amatzil and etzalim she'ein rechel of klal ki hishavus chachma mehakeser hi me'ayin mamish v'lo yikasir shtalsha she'ein b'chinas is havus yesh meish chulu. Now this Keser of Atzilus is very special. Why? Because to come from Hashem, that He's infinite, into the limitation of Seder Shtalshus, to come into the limitation of His wisdom and His attributes, there needs to be a process that we're going to speak about called Tzimtzum. Which that means, to come from infinite to finite, there has to be a jump. There has to be, you take away the whole infinite, and you just reveal one finite thing, one limited thing. Which is very different than if you already have something, and you just limit that thing you already have. You already have something, and you just bring it down to a lower level. If a teacher has wisdom, and he brings it down to a student. So he's not taking away his whole wisdom. He's not changing the topic. He has the same exact idea. He just brings it down to a slightly lower level. That's called a parsa. Like we spoke about previously, what a parsa is in Lech Lecha. Whereas the Divat Tzimtzum means that what he wants to say is so infinite, is so deep, that the student could never understand it ever. So he has to completely push that idea out of his mind and find some small idea they could give over. And so this is the idea of the Keser of Atzilus. V'hinei b'chol ha'ma'aseh yesh b'chenes Keser Mutza ki malchus Atzilus nasa Keser Bria, malchus Bria Keser Yitzira. Ach ha'hefresh bin Keser Atzilus Keser sheb'chol oilamais ki his havas Atzilus hu al yidei tzimtzum or insef. Li is makom pari b'chol mamish cholu. His havas bia hainu yidei parsa ha'mavsik bin Atzilus Bria even Bria Yitzira cholu. V'li makom pari v'hefresh bin parsa makom pari yuvan b'hektim inyan tzimtzum b'or insef. Ki hinei or insef hainu or v'gili. Li is his pashtus his havas. Mokar v'chaysu or insef. Shabbat Musay or insef Shabbat Musay. Hainu b'chinas sheyesh boy or lias mir mispashet lahavas el lahachis. Yizeu kodem shenivra ha'olam hayahu u'shmai b'vad. Tahainu hu insef ba'atzmai u'shmai hu or insef Shabbat Musay. Shurag b'chinas shmai shu b'chinas agili. Tahainu mashiyachal lias misgal mispashet. K'mo yiziv hashemesh mi hashemesh shaziv hu ha'or sheyesh b'shemesh lahar al haaretz. V'shemesh atzmai hainu guf hashemesh atzmai v'hinei har hayotze meshemesh nikar b'shem or k'ma shekatzav v'ikar l'kim l'or yoim shayom nikar or ashem ispashtis or v'haziv v'ashemer v'yoim ashenkin atzmai hashemesh nikar mar v'k'ma shekatzav v'shnei hamros ha'gedolim chulu v'kachal b'or insef sha'or nikar ha'gili shem ispashit mimenu his sabas or v'chayis chulu v'insef atzmai v'b'chenes amar shemakar ha'or mimenu nim shachor. So what does this mean? This means, in order to understand how Hashem makes Atzilus, we have to say that there's a difference between a Tzimtzum and a Parsa. What's the idea of a Parsa? Like we said, if you have a teacher and a student and he limits his understanding to give it to a student on a lower level. What's the idea of a Tzimtzum? Tzimtzum is, you have something infinite, and in order to make room for something finite, you have to take away that whole infinite revelation in order there should be a place for something finite. If you have an idea which is so deep that the student can't understand it at all, you can't just limit it. However much you limit it, the student still won't be able to understand it. You have to push away that whole idea, your whole way of thinking, and come up with a new way of thinking that the student can relate to. So this idea is called we're going to use two things. One is called Or Amor, and one is called Hu Shamoy. What's the idea of Or Amor? We're going to say B'Kitzer, because it's running out of time. The idea of Or Amor is that there's the sun and there's the light from the sun. And in the light of the sun, there's the way the light shines out of the sun, and the way the light is still included in the sun. What's the difference between the light of the sun, the way that's inside of the sun, or the way it's outside of the sun? When the light is inside the sun, so you can't see it because it's in the sun. When it's out of the sun, you could see it. Where is the light stronger? Really, the light is stronger inside the sun. If it can shine outside the sun, in the sun itself, for sure, it's very strong. But you can't see it; it's hidden. In order for it to come outside of the sun, in order for us to see the light, it has to come outside of the sun. It's the same thing. Hashem is infinite. Hashem is no definition, and He's infinite, and His revelation of Himself, how Hashem expresses Himself, is also infinite. If Hashem is infinite, then His revelation is also infinite. But the way that it's still included in Himself, meaning the way that Hashem is revealing Himself to Himself, so there's no way we could relate to that, because like we said, it's infinite. In order for it to be something that we could see, He has to take it outside of Himself. He has to make a place where you don't see Hashem's infinite truth, in order that there should be a revelation of some type of understanding of Hashem in a finite manner. That's one idea. And then there's something called Hashem and His name. What's the idea of a name? A name is how other people relate to you. They call you by your name. Your name you don't need for yourself. You don't need to call yourself by your own name. And in fact, somebody who always speaks to himself in his own name, you think he's a little bit strange. A name is only needed for someone else to relate to you. So what does that mean? Hashem himself only needs this light, this revelation, that we should relate to him. So he created a revelation of himself so that we should be able to understand him. And that's this light which originally was included in himself. And then he made a place where we could be able to see it. So Hashem will continue tomorrow on this topic.